So welcome everyone to, I believe it's our 15th annual meeting. What a year we have had. It's almost impossible to recount all the changes, the ups and the downs. We had the mixed city riots, which were treacherous and terrible. And then we had, for the first time in the history of the Israeli government, an Arab party sitting in the government with four members. A totally unprecedented year, which now has seen a budget of almost $10 billion going towards the Arab sector. Truly a miraculous sum of money and vitally necessary. In addition, we have a staff that's second to none that we've ever had. And for that, I credit the director, Liron Shochem, who has just done an outstanding job in bringing together this highly talented group of people. So Liron, please go ahead and introduce the program.
Thank you so much, Brian. Thank you everyone to joining us today and welcome. We are delighted to be here at the annual meeting. As many of you know, the Interagency Task Force on Israeli-Arab Issues is, I'm just making sure that the views are clear. Elisa, can you please make sure it's speaker view?
It is.
Thank you, thank you. So thank you, hello everyone and welcome. As many of you know, the Interagency Task Force is an educational resource center for the American Jewish community about Arab citizens and Jewish-Arab relations in Israel. Our annual meeting is an opportunity to reflect on the major events of the year, thank our members and partners for support, and present our activities and services. We are so happy that the virtual format allows us to welcome professionals from around the country and have them join us. But holding the meeting over Zoom does mean that we're condensing what is usually a full day meeting into an hour and a half. So for this purpose, we have broken up today's meeting into two parts. The first is a panel discussion about the complex and dynamic developments in our issues that Brian opened with. And this will be the heart of our program. It will run about 50 or 55 minutes. The second part is a shorter discussion of our work and just how deeply American Jewish organizations are leaning into these issues this year. Before we dive in, I want to share a few technical details. Chat and Q&A are both open for this call. Please use Q&A to post questions for the panel and use the chat for comments and questions to share with the group. IATF staff, Ilan, Amit, Erica Shaps, and Sanwa Jala Masawa are monitoring and responding so that the chat itself can be a vibrant part of the discussion. If you prefer to share questions privately, please do so to any one of us. Erica, Ilan, and Sanwa, can the three of you please say hello in the chat so people can find you easily? And if you want to ask questions anonymously, message any one of us. Now to move into our program. As Brian said in his opening, this was a pivotal year for Jewish-Arab relations in Israel. Starting in the midst of the fourth consecutive election cycle in Israel and a global pandemic, subsequent months saw unprecedented violence between Jewish and Arab citizens, as well as groundbreaking political alliances, social and economic developments. But Jewish-Arab relations in Israel have been a growing social and economic priority in Israel for 2 decades, with many milestones and challenges over this year. What made this past year so pivotal on so many fronts, and what are the implications? To discuss this, we're delighted to have with us 3 extraordinary speakers, each with unique perspectives into these developments. Professor Mohammed Latad, Dean of Law at Tzfat Academic College, the youngest person to become a Dean of Law in Israel and the first Muslim to become Dean of Law. He's also a senior research fellow at the Institute for National Security Studies and holds other distinguished positions. Shahira Shalabi, a member of the local council in Haifa, was also the first Arab woman who served as deputy mayor in the city. She's an activist and change maker in her own right. Barak Louzon also wears many hats. He is executive director of the Israel office at the San Francisco Jewish Community Federation. He is an Israeli activist, educator, and innovator, and sits on various boards related to Jewish, Arab, and Israeli-Palestinian relations. The bios will be posted on the chat as we go. So let's dive in. If the panelists can please open your cameras and join us. Thank you. Professor Watad, the first question goes to you. In May, the country was shaken by some of the worst escalations in Jewish-Arab relations in Israeli history. Only weeks later, an Arab party was inaugurated into a governing coalition for the first time ever. This young government has since passed the largest economic development plan for Arab citizens in history, as well as a large plan to combat violence in Arab communities. How do we understand such extremes happening in parallel? And what do they tell us about the state and direction of Jewish-Arab relations in the country? Thank you for joining us.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Liron, for this question. Well, the way to explain things is the fact that we live in the Middle East. That's to start with. But more specifically, that we live in Israel with all the contradictions that exist inside the country, focusing on the Jewish part, on the Arab part, or in the mixed cities of the state of Israel. But to be honest, the recent May events in Israel is an important moment where we had to remember for the first time, because somehow we tended to forget this, that the relationship between Arabs and Jews in Israel are very sensitive. Despite all efforts, and there have been efforts to bridge the gaps between Arabs and Jews, the recent 2 years, particularly during or through the global pandemic experience that we had at the same time a political complexity. We went to vote something like 4 or 5 times. We didn't know which kind of government we will have. The more the complicated politics have become, the more hatred we have witnessed in Israel between left and right, between Arabs and Jews, in some contexts between religious and secular people, etc., etc. That's part of a reality show in the 21st century. But at the same time, there have been great realization of the fact that there is an Arab minority in Israel. And these are not only citizens of the state of Israel, but we're talking about indigenous people who have been asking and demanding some kind of indigenous rights. For many years, we have heard some statements by prime ministers who admitted basically that the Arab population of the state of Israel have been discriminated against. But for the first time in the history of the state of Israel, and I emphasize the word history of the state of Israel, I will come back to that, there's kind of institutional admission of this fact. The government by itself has admitted that the Arab population has been discriminated against, and that there are the needs, compelled needs to make some steps forward the Arab population. Now, I do think that this kind of admission comes from an economic cost-benefit analysis, which basically was initiated by our current prime minister, who made this statement even before he became prime minister of the state of Israel. There is an interest for the state of Israel that the socioeconomic level situation, standard of life of the Arab population be in a higher position. That would come only on the benefits for the state of Israel. Taking that together and going through the whole sensitive relationship between Arabs and Jews, and with the complexity of the political arena of the recent 2 years, I think more and more politicians have become more pragmatic. That doesn't mean that they have neglected their ideologies, not from the right, not from the left, not from the Arab side, not from the Jewish side. But this kind of pragmatism have infected, quote unquote, not only the Jewish political side, but also the Arab political side. Speaking of Ram as the first Arab political party to join the coalition. Now, to the best or to the worst, and I'm not making any political statement here, I think the fact that an Arab political party, not to speak of a religious one, has joined the Israeli coalition is a historical event. You may bless or you may curse this event, but it's a historical event. It says a lot. It says a lot, particularly because it is not just another addition to the coalition, but this is the kind of addition where you are becoming a very powerful party in the coalition. And I think politicians from the whole spectrum, the political spectrum, have admitted that RAM is an important and crucial political player in this coalition, and we see that in different votes every day.
So we should just make it clear, if anybody hasn't heard or been familiar, that Mansour Abbas is the head of RAM, which is the Arab political party representing the Islamic movement, and had been part of the joint list, splintered off this year to follow a pragmatic agenda, and became part of this governing coalition. And you're saying now, as you're saying, has unique leverage in this coalition.
Indeed, indeed. Now, for him, the excuse was not pragmatism in the large sense, but pragmatism in the very narrow sense, and that is the crime and the law violations in the Arab society of the state of Israel. This has been the golden ticket for him, by which he argued that he's going to the government in order to fight against criminal activity and criminal organizations in the Arab society. Which takes me to the other segment of your question that deals with the situation of fighting criminal activity in Arab society. Well, it's not secret, as I said already, that the Arab population in Israel, the Arab society as such, has been neglected in Israel. I do recall the fact that the state was not interested in getting into the villages, into the cities. Poverty in these cities, in these villages, did not concern the state itself. So when you have vacuum in when we speak about, I'm a lawyer by the end of the day, so I have to speak law or some terms of law. When you have a black holes, then somebody must take control over these black holes. And usually these are not the people who obey the law, but rather people who would like to break the law, people who are violent. And this has been the case for the Arab societies in Israel. Now, when I speak about violent people, I speak about criminal organizations. That doesn't mean that I speak of the mafia with all what it means, but I do speak of criminal organizations within small villages, within small cities. They have taken control over the state, over these cities and villages, to the extent that the state found itself or was surprised by the huge giant in the room. That, taken together with the fact that the police power in Israel is not one of the best powerful institutes in Israel in general. I'm talking not in the Jewish, not in the Arab society. There have been many claims by the police power in Israel to empower this institute, but things did not work well. Now, if you take these two events
by empower, you mean strengthen and improve the institution.
Of course.
And what we're talking about here is not only was there a plan to combat violent crime, but if anybody had been following the headlines about Arab society this year, violent crime is at crisis levels, with the largest portion of homicides in Israel happening among and between Arab citizens.
Now, just remember that we cannot ignore the fact that back in 2000, October 2000, there has been an event in Israel, a very sad event where 13 citizens, Arab citizens of the state of Israel, were killed by the police power. And there has been an official investigation about that. And the committee, the Or Committee, led by Justice Or of the Supreme Court of Israel, wrote manifestly that the police power in Israel perceived the Arab citizen in Israel as an enemy. Now, this statement, made as powerful as it sounds, did not help in creating any kind of trust between the lay Arab person and the law enforcement. To the contrary, to the extent that even the Arab citizen, I would guess, has started to perceive the police officer, the single police officer, as an enemy at the same time. So it's not a citizen versus a police officer, but it's an enemy against an enemy. It's basically the Arab against the Jews. Even that in the police power, you might find Muslims, Christians, and Druze. But the image was an enemy against an enemy. So you would see great amount of distrust between both sides. People are not deterred by the police in general in Israel, or the more so in the Arab society. That will lead me to the May events, because the May events basically reminded us of the fact that the situation between Arabs and Jews is quite very fragile. There are lots of residuals between both sides, even though people try to live together and be nice to each other and create their co-society, coexistence. You know, when time comes, when there are serious issues, there are sensitive national issues, then each one will take a different side. Add to that people, fanatic people, political people, particularly from the right side of the spectrum, who started visiting, quote to quote, the mixed cities in Israel, such as Lod, Acre, and other cities, taking together an important fact that Arab criminal organizations have taken advantage of that event. Sometimes to make some kind of a money laundering or identity laundering. We are nationalistic, we're not just criminals. Some other times to make benefits. You know, you give protection to all these restaurants and other businesses in Acre, and at the same time, you create that violence. Now, in this, yes, please.
No, I want to make sure you've already shared so much. I want to make sure that Shahira and Barak have a chance to also respond to everything we put on the table. So a last word, and you'll have a chance to come back also.
Sure, definitely. So I'll just make one statement. By the end of the day, we have been speaking about the history of the state of Israel. I think we are way far from speaking of history. We are a very young state in Israel. The relationship between Arabs and Jews are getting to know a new era, unknown era. We don't really know what are the characteristics and the features of this era. We just understand that the whole political game has been for more than 70 years in one phase, and now it's taking another phase. It's another track. And we have to wait and see how things develop, or we help to develop things in one track.
That is quite a statement, and it's a great segue to Shahira. Shahira Shalabi, as a local council member in Haifa and an activist, you are on the ground pursuing greater inclusion and equality for Arab citizens of Israel, and in a mixed city, no less. Is it a new era for Jewish-Arab relations? We've had large socioeconomic development budgets in the past, and before the May events, there were these budgets and efforts to promote integration. What did the May events and what does this watershed political integration indicate about the current status of Jewish-Arab relations from your perspective? And is there a sense really that it's a new moment and this new government can address things that others had not?
Okay, thank you, Liron, and thank you for this opportunity to be with you. And I will answer these questions in a different ways. Okay, have some answers are very direct and some of them are really complicated, and I would like to add a few things from my friend Professor Watad on trying to describe what's going on here, because I agree with him very much and on so much points that he pointed and topics that he talked about. And then I want to say something about the question of the governmental economic investments in the Arab society. And then this large program that we are talking about, there are two main problems. Okay, first, these programs are temporary. It means that they're trying to close the gap, but these kind of programs will never close the gap, because the gap is very, very, very deep. And then we need more investments, and we need more fields to be to put efforts in other fields in order just to close the gap between the Arabs and the Jewish. I'm talking about the way of living, about education, and about health and other issues. But there's another issue. there is the economic investments, but there is also the recognition issue, because the Arabs in Israel live in a situation that they feel that living here for more than 75 years, and they don't know yet what the government of Israel, what the state of Israel wants from them, okay? I think that the state of Israel didn't decide yet what kind of relationship she would like, or it would like to have with her, with its Arab citizens, okay? Sometimes the state would like us to be integrated, very well integrated, and sometimes the state treats us as enemies. And we live in this situation all the time. You know, sometimes I know that some of the political parties will decide that they want to be integrated, they want to be very pragmatic, as Professor what had said, and they want to discuss, and they want to be in a relationship with the government, they want to be partners in the government, they would like to participate and to cooperate with the government. But at the same time, when the government changes, the policy will change. You know, it's a kind of, there is no policy. And what we are looking for, and this is something that I'm bringing from the street, as an activist, as a political, I'm saying that one of the main things that the Arabs wanted from the state to have a clear policy. We would like to negotiate with the state about our status in the state. What kind of citizenship, what kind of citizens the states would like us to be? I'll give you a few examples, okay? Sometimes the state, you know, one government will say, we want you to be equals as individuals, okay? It's a kind of the as if they can put more efforts, work hard, and you will find your place in the state as an individual and not as an group, okay? And then we will work hard and hard and harder and harder, and we will be in a good positions, in a good position in the state, and the good position in the political parties, and etc. But the time that the government will change, everything will change with the government. And this is something that we're not stable. And during, you know, the last 20 years, more than 20 years, that the state of Israel politically is not stable. It means that each time that the prime minister will change prime minister, will change the party who lead the country, the relation to Arab citizens will change from A to Z. And this is the way that we sometimes, so many times, we can't understand how to relate to the state. We want to be integrated. We don't want to be integrated.
Can I ask two questions about this then? One, do you feel, or do you want to speak for yourself about how you wish to be perceived by the state? And are changes in national politics, perhaps politics is by nature very unstable, but do you feel like there's a change in Israeli society towards Arab citizens of Israel?
You know, there are so many levels, okay? You know, what I call it, you know, in the level of the relationship between people, I can see that there are so many people would like to live together, okay? They would like to share the space, they would like to share the resources. But some of the people don't know how to do that because they don't have a model, they don't have a program. It means that a bottom up, you know, if you talk about bottom up, the people would like to have a way to live together, okay? To work together, to live at the same places, to live at the same buildings. And you know, if you go to the mixed cities, okay, you will find most of the neighborhoods are mixed. Most of the buildings, people live next to each other, door to door. We are talking about, you know, daily life living together. But the problem is that at the political level, there is something missed. There's a gap between the way that we live in a daily life to the way that we live in the general political level. And we need a program, we need a governmental program to say and to decide how to teach people, to encourage people to continue living together and building this kind of relationship.
So one last quick question for your opening before we move to Barak. Can you give us an example of what it's like? You're in a local government council. Can you give us one example of something you've been trying to promote in Haifa to create these capacities and from this role?
You know,
And-
one of the main things that we are Haifa are doing this, and also in other cities, okay, is bringing kids to meet each other at schools, okay. It's a kind, we call it, you know, sometimes we just we don't believe in it, okay. Sometimes we think that it doesn't work, but it's really worked. You know, when you live in the same city and you're Arab, the Arab kids and the Arab Jews don't meet each other because they are studying in a separated education system, okay? Bringing them to meet each other, to do things together. This is something very, very important. And you know, one of the things that is very, very unique to Haifa, that because most of the neighborhood are mixed, most of the activities, the afternoon activities, what we call it, the non-formal education activities, are mixed. And this is something very, you know, you can go to a sport a lesson and you will find it mixed. You can go, people draw together, people do so many things together, and I think it's very important. But, you know, I want to say again, it's not enough. And this is what I'm trying to say, that it's not enough because it's in a personal level, it's an individual level, it's local. And when you are working the local level in order to build this good relationship, even excellent relationship, and you'll find your prime minister doesn't encourage that, encourage people to hate each other, and then you're in a kind of a place that you don't know what is right, what's wrong. Do you need to love each other or to hate each other? You know, in a very simple way. I'm trying to make it very simple because it's
High
very
contrast.
personal. Okay.
For sure. Barak, I think you're in a good position to synthesize some of these insights. And I want to say that all these panelists are challenged to give their biggest responses in 6 minutes, and Bill for the first take. So it's a big challenge. Barak, you wear many hats. Israeli, American Jewish professional, shared society leader, peace activist. In all these respects, you've been working on issues of Jewish-Arab relations and shared society for a while. How do you see Israeli society changing, and what surprised you about events this year? Can you build a little bit on what Shahira just shared about the complexity of the confusion about what it means to be Arab in Israel and promoting these issues? And please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for having me. And it's such a privilege to be to follow Muhammad and Shahira. I would say that, you know, right after the events in May, I've heard from Shahira about how she, like what was her role as deputy mayor in Haifa during the actual kind of riots. And I can't stress enough how important this idea of shared power within city between Jews and Arabs have played a role, because it actually stopped the violence. Shahira told me how she and her friends went there. She knew exactly when the police comes. She was in touch with the police, right, Shahira? And she could arrange the young Arabs and the young Jews who came to kind of confront each other. So I think we have a lot to learn from this kind of local model into a national kind of larger model. So thanks again for having me. I was asked by Leon what I think has been has changed in the Israeli society. So much has changed, but one thing hasn't. That my son, my oldest son, out of 5 boys, who is now in the paratroopers in the army service, is talking to me in the phone over the phone, and share his experience from serving in Hebron. And you know what hasn't changed? This is the exact stories I told some 25 years ago. And while it hasn't changed, I think it caused the Israeli society from within to change a lot in recent years. So I'm going to share a little of my humble perspective as a federation representative on the ground in Israel. Once again, as a father of 5 boys, Karen and I, we know that we're facing 15 years of sleepless nights with these boys going to the army. Me working on shared society in the last almost 2 decades or so, and maybe identifying a little bit of a change that I would love to share with you. Nothing so coherent, as we still, I think, reflecting and trying to better understand what happened here since May, up until May and since May. So I think, one thing is quite clear, and it goes to your society as well. The Israeli society have been going through rough years of serious political polarization. I think lots of this polarization is really connected to issues of identity within Israel. It's an inner process within Israel of kind of reauthoring or maybe authoring the next chapter of Israel, what it means to be Israeli. And I think that within this process, we had to choose who will govern us, right? It took us four election campaigns to come up at the end with the understanding that we're split 50-50, and that we need to come up with a new, I would say, unbelievable government coalition that I don't think anyone expected it to survive more than a month, and it just concluded 6 months past the budget and keep on working. A marriage of convenience, maybe. In new era, maybe. We hear more Arabic in the Knesset than ever before in Israel. I think that one of the observation is that Arabic, the Arab language, and Arabs on the Israeli street, on the Israeli parliament, in the Israeli hospitals, of course in academia, have become so part of the Israeli texture that I don't think that I think we should look at it both from the perspective of a major, huge success of the project of integration that many of the people here have been part of, but also maybe a cause for a backlash within the Israeli society on this very integration.
When you say project of integration, do you mean socioeconomic efforts to get more Arab citizens in higher education, job market?
Job market, yes.
The government budgets that have been, okay.
So I would say that shared society as a term became much more of a descriptive than normative lately. We are much more together than ever in every place. There's no place where Jews and Arabs are not together, are not meeting each other. In the airports, in shopping malls, in academia now, and 50% of us are Arabs in the north, 30% in the Negev.
Is that integration though, or is that shared society?
So it's
I see some. I know that Mohammed and Shahira will want to respond to this, but please finish your thought.
Of course, I don't think it's by coincidence that mayors would call cities mixed cities and not shared cities. I think there's a normative kind of value to the idea of shared city rather than just a mixed city. I think there's something there, but I would like to refer to two kind of two ways of looking at this integration and this kind of closeness. One on the systemic level and the other one on the individual one. So the systemic level, cities, we see more and more Arab from kind of Mahamad Benoni, middle
class,
a larger middle class coming into cities that were kind of Jewish cities beforehand. You see more and more schools, Jewish schools, that are now encompass more and more Arab kids. You see much more places that were beforehand solely kind of Jewish and now are shared. I think that you see on the media, on the news and on reality shows and so on and so forth, you see more and more Arabs and Arabic, together. It becomes, my kids kind of hated learning Arabic as they love other things. But since Fauda, Arabic became a cool language, and now we're paying for a tutor to teach our kids. We are seeing Arab celebrities, on the news. We see them, we have more and more Arab culture coming out and being kind of presented to the Israeli society.
So I'm going to zoom you to say, so okay, we have this on the one hand, so connected to, we still had the May escalations this year. How do we see both these in parallel? The same question that we started with.
So I think we should acknowledge what happened in May. So one thing that happened is I would say a Palestinian narrative that came into life. Think about Sheikh Jarrah. Jews are taking, Arabs out of their homes. Talk about Temple Mount and the access to it. And then Hamas tying everything in, shooting rockets into Israel as a solidarity with Israeli Arabs. This is a major thing that I think was so hard for many Israeli Jews to kind of accept. Putting that on the platform of what I just said before, a great integration, us living together more than ever, I think what we saw was a huge explosion that has so much in it and so many kind of reasons and so on, but created this moment where you could hear more and more Arab, young Arab men and women identifying themselves, a little bit as Shahira said before, and Muhammad, identifying themselves both as Israelis, more participating in the Israeli society than ever, but also Palestinians in their national identity more than ever, the same person. It is so hard, I think, for Israeli Jews to grasp. And so just imagine what it is for these kind of young Arabs to live with. I think what we saw in May, sorry.
I think that this is already a lot. I think that there's an opportunity here for Shahira and Mohammed to respond to the things that you said about integration and about whether shared society is normative or descriptive. Shahira, do you want to go first? Mohammed, you'll go after.
I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question again? And
it was more responding to what Barak was saying about the project of integration, and that may reflected some kind of a backlash to successful integration, to the fact that there are more shared spaces, and maybe to complicate the issue of what shared is for us.
Okay. Actually, we talked about this a lot, and what do I think about the shared society and the shared relation and shared space. I have two main things to say. I think it's very, very important to build our shared spaces and to discuss it, and not only just to share it, to discuss what kind of relationship we want to build, to discuss our power relation inside the shared spaces. Okay, because we have a lot of shared spaces, just like it's the same, like this relationship between the Arab society and the state. Sometimes it might be very, very nice relationship, but it's built in that you are a minority and we are the majority, and we are the hegemony, and we decide how this shared space should be managed. Okay, when you build a shared space and when you talk about shared society, the most important thing that you challenge is the way that you lead this space together. The question is the ownership. Okay, when you have a shared space, the question of ownership, it's not for granted. Each one who share the space will feel that it's his own place or her own place, and it's a very complicated issue, because if it's for us both, we need to lead it together. We need to decide about the rules. We need to decide about how we divide the resources. We need to take the decisions together. But usually in the shared spaces, it's not that way. The way that shared spaces are built in Israel, that the Arabs always are a minority. When they are a minority, they are not taking part in the decision-making policy. And the decision-making policy, and they are not sitting around the decision-making table. And if we change, when we think about, just like when I always say that, he's my partner always. When we say about that relation, that's a shared relation, is about relationship. The shared society is about power relation, and we need to discuss the power relation. How do we build justice and equality in the shared spaces?
Mohammed, I want to invite you to respond to this.
I'd like to go back to a statement made by my esteemed colleague Shahira in her opening statement, when she contented that Israel doesn't know what it wants or what to expect from the Arab society in Israel, which I think partially the statement is, well, not even partially, absolutely is true. But at the same time, I doubt if the Arab citizens of the state of Israel know quite well what they want from the state of Israel or even from themselves. There is a crisis of identity in Israel because there are multiple identities in Israel, but there is one single lost identity in Israel, and that is the Israeli identity. For many years in Israel, they used to speak of the Jewish identity versus the Palestinian identity. If you're a Jew, then you're Israeli. If you're Palestinian, even Israeli Palestinian, like Israeli citizen of the state of Israel, once Palestinian, always Palestinian. Whatsoever you say, whatsoever you make any statement, the way you look, it doesn't mean anything. You're always Palestinian. And there's one thing that's called Israeli. Now, put aside the Israeli chutzpah, which is quite common to all Israelis alike, Arabs and Jews. There are many common features that have been developed through the 75, 76 years of the existence of the state of Israel between Arabs and Jews who live here. And no one has invested a single effort in developing this identity. This identity is supposed to reflect on the multiculturalism of the state of Israel instead of multiple cultures. Nowadays in Israel, now theoretically speaking, we have many cultures. We sometimes figure out here and there certain features of this kind of multiculturalism, but we don't really know what it means. Now, something happened in Israel, and I think the Jewish side in Israel doesn't know how to react to that thing, which I'm going to elaborate on now. For the Jews, the identity question is quite easy. They're Jews, and therefore they're Israelis, and that's quite easy to know what it means for them, Israelis. Now, put aside the fact that between themselves, they're quite split, harshly even disputed about what it means to be a Jew. But this is another issue. From the Arab side, the Arab population of the state of Israel used to identify itself only as Palestinians. Later on, I think towards the late 80s of the previous century, they used even to, not to speak of themselves as Israelis, but they used to hide the Palestinian identity in order to integrate in daily life. I'm not talking about politics, but I'm talking about daily life. Nowadays, the young generation in Israel, the educated generation, is proud of its national identity as Palestinians, and at the same time, they don't ask to hide or to negate their citizenship identity as Israelis. To that extent, they demand two things. They demand rights, collective rights of indigenous minority, and at the same time, they demand civic rights as citizens of the state of Israel. Now, for Israel, it's quite complicated. How does that work? You can't be at the same time Israeli and Palestinian, because Palestinians are enemies of the state of Israel, and you need to show loyalty. But for the Arab Israelis, the meaning of loyalty is quite different. That doesn't mean to praise you every day. It means, I'm part of the state of Israel. I am helping in building up the state of Israel. It's not just about paying taxes, but I'm being professors in law, professors in physician, medicine, economics, technology, etc., etc., etc. And that's the new era I'm talking about. And for that, I think we need time in order for both sides to digest this new kind of complexity of identities, because we don't live anymore in a dichotomy between Jews and Palestinians. And Barak, just to make it clear, there are many Israeli citizens, Arab citizens in Israel, who identify their national identity as Arabs, not necessarily Palestinians. That doesn't mean that they negate their Palestinian identity, but just to make it clear for the audience here, we Israelis are all Palestinians. I work in Tzfat, and when I meet Jewish residents of Tzfat, they tell me they're Palestinians because they were born in mandatory Palestine. Both Jews and Arabs who lived in mandatory Palestine used to have an ID which says citizenship, not nationality, Palestinians. Thank you.
I add one more thing, please? One more
course.
very short thing. Yes, I agree with you, Hamad, about that. It's not only the state that didn't decide what kind of relationship we want to have with the Arab citizens. Also, the Arabs didn't decide how to live in the states of Israel. Okay, and we need, if you ask me, the most important thing that we can do today, I'm thinking as Palestinians in Israel, we need to be very strategic, okay, not pragmatic. You know, we are moving from pragmatic to non-pragmatic, okay? But I would like to be very strategic, to think what would be my interest, what will help my society today, what will help the Palestinians and the Israeli live in the same state in a peaceful way. What kind of recognition and what kind of reconciliation we want to have in the States? How do we want to live here? And this is, we need to be very strategic. I'm thinking that the most important thing that we should do now is to build the strategic thinking center of the Palestinians in Israel in order to think and to build then all plans. Because we have, you know, you said, Muhammad, when we are very professional, we are really very educated, we are academics, we are involved in the field, we know how to deal with the problems of the Palestinian society, and we know how to negotiate with the state. But we need a plan. I'm thinking that if there is something that we need to build is a plan.
This part of negotiating with the state is a new development.
This is, and if you ask me, this is during the last 5 years, people are talking about to join the government or not to join the government. I think it's a kind of negotiation. How to join the government? It's a kind. What do you want from the state? What do you want from the government? What kind of achievements we want to achieve, and what kind of challenges we wanna target? And in order to be very clear in these issues, we need to build it as a strategic plan.
Wow, there's so much. We have about 13, give or take, minutes left, and we do have questions from the room, but I want to put two things on the table. One, it's about, so the questions from the room are about the integrated, they want to know about integrated schools and whether the public education system is an opportunity or a challenge for building a shared society. So I do want you guys to speak about this. There's a question, we're talking about now the negotiation the political negotiation on the level. Ram is not just any party. It's an Arab party of the Islamic movement. And if you can reflect a little bit about how this is perceived and how this negotiation is an ongoing negotiation within Arab society, because it's by no means simple. When the joint list unified the Arab vote, it really was able to coalesce the Arab electorate behind it. And today the Arab electorate is split. I would like to share share a little bit about what you think the reason is for this, and whether this is to put it simply, a good or a bad thing. And then I'm going to end with a question about the trends we're seeing in America, directed to Barak, about the trends we're seeing in Arab Jewish organizations and how that relates to the trends aligns with the trends in Israel. So to repeat, integrated schools and as a public education system, a challenge or an opportunity for shared society, and then a discussion about Ram and Barak I'll ask for you. So Shahira and Mohammed, I'd like you to please reflect on the schools and Ram. Mohammed, you want to start, and then Shahira?
Yeah, if that's what you want, yes. In order to patch up the gaps between Jews and Arabs, they have to get to know each other. That's to start with. You don't get to know somebody unless you meet with him or with her face to face. You eat with him or with her around the table. Yesterday, I live in Haifa, in a building which consists of 59 apartments. Yesterday, I was informed that one of our neighbors has passed away. I really don't know him. I don't even know his name. He lives in the 11th floor. I live in the first floor. But this morning I dressed up and I went there to share my condolences with his wife. So when I entered, I said, hello, my name is Mohammed. And she all of a sudden like looked at me, who's Mohammed, right? And I said, I'm your neighbor from the first floor. And I came here to share with you your sadness and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. she started crying, and I wasn't sure whether she was crying because her husband passed away or because she saw me there. But she made this clear before I left that she was shocked when he saw me coming in and introducing myself. And I did that on purpose. I did that. I really don't know her. I don't know her husband. God bless his memory. But I went there because I wanted to share her an example that we are neighbors. My name is Mohammed. Her name is Eti, and let's start talking to each other. So this is one important thing. And mixed schools is a great opportunity in Israel. There are many people who are trying to get advantage of these mixed schools. I know that there's a long lineup for people who would like to admit their children to these schools, and we have really to take advantage of this opportunity. I will stop here and let Shahira address this question and elaborate on the other questions left on.
Okay, there are two kinds of mixed schools. There are the mixed schools that they really discuss also the relationship between the kids, and they educate them for peace, to live in peacefully, to be friends, and they are discussing them. They're teaching the narrative of both societies. But there is another place that kids meet together, especially in the mixed cities, that so many Arab kids or students I attend to the Jewish schools, okay, and they are in these schools are very, very strangers, okay. They have to study in the Hebrew language, no matter how many students they are. And there is another phenomenon that we see it in Lod, Ramli, and Jaffa, that when more than 20% of Arab students come to the school, then the Jewish students will leave, because the parents, they don't want them to study with each other. And this means that if we want to have a mixed education system, we need to build it together, because it doesn't happen from itself. You need to put your principles, your ideology, and the education, the shared education. It's a kind of a shared education system.
In a sense, this is a microcosm of what you're saying about shared society at large. If you may have people interacting, you may have people in the same space, but it has to be you're saying it has to be an intentional process for it to work.
Yeah, I will say one more thing, that sometimes in the shared workplaces, you will find a shared group working together, but they avoid talking about politics, because if they mention some political issues, they will fight. And they have agreement, sometimes it's a clear agreement, sometimes something that that you don't talk about politics. If the time that you're talking about politics, it means that you are destroying our relationship. This is why I'm saying it's not about relationship, it's about the way and the ideology and the basics that you decide how to live together.
I'm torn because I see Barak may have something he wants to add here. So we have I'm going to throw on small questions that we have, not small, they're big questions from the room, but we're going to give them only a minute. And then I'm going to end with a question I was hoping to share to end with Barak. One is a question about COVID and whether or not the global pandemic increased a sense of collective destiny among Israelis, or did it also increase divisiveness? Is there any thought about how all this happening on the backdrop of a pandemic affected relations? Mohammed, I see you ready to.
One of my positions is that I'm a senior member of the Press Council in Israel. And one of the things that used to irritate me is that Arab citizens of the State of Israel would be interviewed on TV or on radio only on issues that were related to the Arab society. Now, it doesn't matter if you're a professor in chemistry or in any kind of science or in law or physician whatsoever, no one would ever interview you on TV. During COVID-19, what was still in COVID-19, but during the main period, all of a sudden, you will see that all these physicians that Shahira mentioned correctly and aptly, who are very famous and they're directors of their departments, or these professors in law, the new stars in the media, Muhammad Majad, who is the son of a previous member of the Knesset, Ghalib Majad, all of a sudden, they have become seriously stars on TV. And they were interviewed not only about the Arab society, but on principal issues of policy in the state of Israel. So if there's anything good apart from Zoom that we have gained from COVID-19 is the fact that the Arab society in the professional level has become feasible in Israel. And this is something to be mentioned. And I'm thinking about writing an article about that.
We look forward to it. One more question for the room, and then I'll have my closing question, and it's actually a synthesis of two. People asked about the broader issue of normalization with regard to shared society, and if you can explain the difference between collective and individual identities. So one, the issue of normalization about how does it affect the willingness within Arab society to become a more integrated part of Israeli society, and why? And I don't know if the question means normalization with if the question is about Israel's normalization with the region. Maybe the person who wrote that can clarify in the chat which one they meant, but if not, we'll take it to our own interpretation. And the difference between collective identity and individual rights. Shahira, do you want to jump in? And Barak, I'm not forgetting about you.
Okay. It's like when we talk about normalization, actually, I think we are not busy with the issue of normalization in Israel, because when we talk about normalization, we talk about the Palestinians' relationship between Palestinians from the West Bank and Gaza and Israel more than in Israel, because there is a lot. Every field in Israel is normalized. Okay, we go to the same universities, we work in the same places, we live at the same neighborhoods, we eat at the same restaurants, we work together, we do so many things, we do business together. Then we are not busy in the daily life with the issue of normalization. Okay, this is what I think. We are busy with equal rights, with recognition, with whether we can be partners in leading the state, whether we can lead an organization can you be a director of a hospital in Israel? As an Arab can be director? Yes, there are few, but in the north, and not in Haifa and not in Tel Aviv. Okay, and these are the questions that we're busy with. And the question whether we want to be in a normal life, we want to have normal relationship, I can answer that 100% of the Arabs in Israel would like to have normal relationship with the Jews. Okay, 99%. Okay, this is, let me say, but the individual identity and the collective identity is whether it's me, Shahira, putting effort in order to improve her skills and occupy that position, whether it's Shahira as a person can get her rights, whether Shahira as a part of a group would like to get recognition and to have the state treat me as a group of people who needs to think about their needs, the need of closing the gaps, ending the discrimination, okay? Ending the discrimination against a group of people. When something happens, doesn't matter if Shahira is a good person or not, she's Arab. She's immediately Arab, okay? This Arab that we are encouraging them to put efforts and to be a good person, okay? To be good citizenship, you are the enemy at the time that something will happen. And when we are treated as enemies, we can't be good citizenship forever.
Thank you. And that really brings us to a close. So I'm going to end with a question to Barak, which segues us into our American Jewish communal conversation. And then we'll close the panel completely. But so before I do that, because some people because we promised this panel will be 55 minutes, I really want to thank all three panelists, Mohammed and Shahira right now, and then Barak, hang on, I'll ask you one more question, and then we'll close the panel after that. So I want to, all these developments did not go unnoticed by the American Jewish community. They were very much, what we saw during the year is that after the May escalations, in many respects, we were afraid. I think it raised hard questions about what's happening, what's going to happen to all the initiatives that have been trying to build shared society. How is it going to reflect on this? Will American Jewish communities for whom these issues are so sensitive, will they retreat? And we were very pleased to see no, neither retreated. At the same time, there's a parallel trend that I think connects to the issue of identity. As much as we see American Jewish organizations lean in, we're also seeing that the discourse within the Jewish Arab organizations, the Arab piece are saying, it's not enough now. We have to be clear that this is not just about shared society and individual rights, that this has to incorporate our Palestinian identity and history into the conversation. So there's two parallel trends that are not necessarily so aligned. And I want to ask you, Barak, as somebody who has been working with the Federation involved in these issues for many years, tell us about how you're navigating this change and how it affects your thinking, your discussions in the American Jewish community, and how you represent the Federation in Israel. Thank you for that.
Yeah, so I'm going to try to do it really, really short. And I understand that we need to close, but it is very delicate, as you understood here. You know, these are identity issues, it's loyalty, and it is so hard. It's hard for us Israelis. I know how hard it is for my fellow, American Jews who sits, in San Francisco, in the Bay Area, and really from a very warm Jewish heart want to help Israel to kind of grow further in this area. What I found to be a little bit effective is that we're in a constant move, in a constant evolvement. So if we used to fund and support the idea of integration, I would say I call it the project of integration, meaning helping NGOs help Arab Israelis to gain hard skills and soft skills and so on, and get into the workforce, academia, and so on and so forth. We have moved in the last few years in following the understanding, exactly like Muhammad and Shahira described before, that although the individual work is important, the systemic work is not less important. So it's less of relating to Arab Israelis as the subject of change, for them to change in order to be Israelis, and actually to divert our funding into the system, into the Israel that need to change to be the home of everybody, which is much more a systemic work. It touches on identity. And you're right, Liron, it is extremely sensitive to talk about to plug in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict into it. It usually, I can say about the Bay Area, I know it's true to more communities. This is a very harsh, charged topic within our community. So how do we integrate it? How do we address it and stay alive? So our way to do it is to understand that the liberal kind of mind view that has led many of us in this work is extremely important and essential, but it's not the only one. There are other grammars from which people understand this work of shared society, which are more conservative, which are more religious, which are more, leaning to different places. So we understood that we have to do a much more of inclusive internal Israeli work vis-a-vis the work of shared society, and also step by step integrating ideas of identity and Palestinian identity among our Arab participants and partners as something that we can actually live with, and we can integrate into our conversations and into our systems and so on, in a way that doesn't blow everything up, but actually, as Shahira requested, acknowledge this identity and include it within our kind of internal work of shared society.
Thank you. And I just want to reiterate the way I hear one of these insights that you're sharing is that because your work at the Federation was so progressive for a long time on these issues, and it was promoted shared society, what you were saying is that now that there's more integration and the shared society is becoming a more, as you said before, descriptive reality, your work is about defining what it means as one that includes voices that perhaps the people who promoted it didn't think about including before, and that might mean religious and conservative Jewish organizations, making it truly representative, a project that represents, and perhaps even the American Jewish Society itself as part of the conversation, which is no small challenge and conceptual reframing.
I think that the internal processes that the Jewish federations are going through, I can speak of our, with all the ideas of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the whole, political polarization within the US, are actually helping us to engage in a conversation that is somehow becomes much more relevant to both of us, and we can kind of pick our brains together in offering ideas and actions.
Thank you. And on this note, I want to thank our panel and invite our participants to stay with us for the next presentation, where we're going to talk about what it means to bring these issues to the American Jewish community. But I really want to heartily thank Professor Mohammed Wattad, Shahira Shalabi, Barak Lozon. Thank you for your time. I hope we'll have you back again in person for more in-depth conversations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
And bye-bye.
This was a lot to process, and really, we put so much on the table. So we're going to take 90 seconds where my colleague Erica Schaps is going to put a link to a Jamboard and put it up on the screen to give people a chance to just let us see visibly what it is that you were thinking and reflect, and what this brought to mind. This is also a moment to get a drink of water and stretch, and then we're going to dive right into the presentation. Erica.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here with you. Many of you have probably used Jamboard before, but I'm going to use a quick tutorial just for those who haven't. You may have seen I dropped a link in the chat right now, and we have this question up on the screen in like a Google Doc. Everyone can click right here on a Post-it note and add your insights. So something like, and now that Post-it note's there. So we'll be able to see all of the different insights from the people in the room, from their experiences of the discussion that we just had. So as Liron said, if everyone wants to take the next 2 minutes to grab a sip of water, stretch, and include their own thoughts on this communal Jamboard, and we'll be back together shortly. Hi, there was a bit of a technical difficulty with the Jamboard. Now everyone should be able to click and open that link. It should work for everyone. So go ahead and click on that link and it should just be open.
Okay, well, I guess we can keep that board going and jump into the presentation to respect everybody's time. So I'm going to share my screen, and then we'll dive right in. So in this next portion, we're going to pick up on just how significant this dynamic year was for American Jewish organizations and how this deeper engagement affected and expanded the task force work. And I want to have the staff of the task force open their cameras so I can do a quick round of introductions about who. Now we're going to talk about all this work. I want everyone to see who is behind making it all happen. I see, in order that I see everyone, it's Alisa Kaf, our wonderful program coordinator. Erica Shaps, who you just met, is our educational programs manager. Ilan Amit, our Israel representative, and Sama, whose camera is not open, is our content specialist in Israel. Thank you, everyone. So now, Sama, thank you for your camera. So I'm going to dive right in. As we heard on the panel and discussed at length, this was a pivotal year in many respects, but the May events were no doubt the most dramatic and raised hard questions about the future of the shared society field. And as I said in the last question to Barak, there was concern that both the Fieldwood Retreat and American Jewish organizations, and we were really amazed within a week of the May events to see field organizations emerging with campaigns asserting the need to remain committed to this work, socioeconomic analyses of the underpinnings of these events, public and private sector voices implementing changes to address these issues. This is in Israel. And likewise, American Jewish organizations leaned in as well. We're interested in more learning and more involvement in these issues. And a simple way of seeing this is through the numbers of events that we held. This year, we held a total of 61 educational programs, which is about, this is not including, which is about 30% more than usual in general, but it also doesn't include missions, because missions were still on hold, which usually make up at least another third of our events. So this is 61 educational programs reflecting more than double what we normally do. Another way of looking at the change is not just by the quantity of events, but by the type. Normally, our work is divided into two tracks, which is an in-depth track mostly reserved for funder organizations, more strategic organizations looking to how to fund or advocate around these issues. And the rest is awareness raising, educational, public-facing events. This year, you can see we did have 24 public-facing events, and as we do, 14 briefings for funders, but we also had more in-depth programs, about 23 programs, which were for strategic processes and deeper capacity building for lay and professionals. I'm going to quickly go through what some of this programming looked like and how it supports the overall quality and impact of our work. The Foundation Forum, as I said before, this is our most in-depth track of education, and it supports a group of philanthropists who are long interested in strategic and pragmatic involvement in the field. For us to be of service for this group, we have to be able to be deeply rooted with access to the most strategic developments in the field, access to government, civil society networks. This work and this access is where our content and issue expertise is anchored, and it informs the rest of our work. And I want to invite Ilan Amit to share, our Israel representative, to share a little bit about what it's like to be the Israel representative in Israel and to bridge the networks and the working on the ground to our most strategic audiences. Ilan?
Thank you, everyone. So thank you all for joining us. I'm Ilan Amit, the Israel representative. I live in Jerusalem, and I've been with the task force for the past year, a bit over a year. How does it look like? Well, spending a lot of time in the car, driving from one meeting to another, meeting with a lot of government officials, directors of governmental agencies and state authorities, learning about what the government is planning for Arab society, some significant plans, such as the national 5-year plan for Arab society, the one that we will be presenting tomorrow together with the authority for social equality. In some cases, it's driving between mixed cities, having cups of coffee and meetings, and joining seminars with activists from Arab society and shared society organizations working to promote shared society in schools, community centers, shared spaces, in the medical system, learning about what they're doing, getting insights from the field, and translating those insights into speakers, panels, papers, publications that we share with you, our audience. And there are also a lot of committees and forums that we, the task force, are members of, where we professionally learn about developments in socioeconomic development programs, education, infrastructure, housing, and planning. This week, for example, I participated in a 2-day seminar with the Prime Minister's office, planning support in Arab civil society for the next 5 years. As part of the next 5-year plan for Arab society. Today, I spent the day in Ramle, meeting with a group of funds and foundations, hosting civil society organizations working on different aspects of shared society in mixed cities, specifically in Lod and Ramle. So spending a lot of time in the field, learning what's happening there, creating the contact with professionals in the field and on the ground, getting the insights, and spending time writing and translating those insights into panels as the one you see, papers as the ones that you hopefully read when we send those, PowerPoints and other forms of sharing this information with you.
Thank you. And I think you were being a little bit modest about not just spending a lot of time in the car, but the access to government committees as an observer and the trust that you've been able to develop with the leading figures so that we're really seen as a reliable and accurate representative to the field. And that's really thanks to the professionalism of our staff on the ground. So this year, just to bring it back to practicalities, we brought this year was a really complex year because there was no government budget until November, and the escalations. So we brought experts to speak about the pending proposals and the socioeconomic priority areas surfaced by these escalations, such as gap year options for youth and as well as others. And that is our ongoing in-depth work, but we were really intrigued and inspired to see many communal and educational organizations that have long been engaging these issues in different capacities, some through pure learning, others advocating or making some allocations. We really saw them not only deepen their involvement, but do so despite real awareness of the complexity and sensitivity of doing so. And therefore we saw many organizations engage in thoughtful and strategic processes. So for some, it was to improve their allocations. For others, it was to build their internal capacities. For others, it was develop content and curriculum related to these issues. And yet others, it was to really internalize and process what it means for them as an organization to work in greater alignment with principles of shared society. And we were really delighted to be part of many of these processes. I want to start with a few examples. One, the JFNA is doing really taking an amazing initiative of commissioning research on shared society efforts in Israel in order to support the entire field of federations with entry points and insights into this work. And we were really proud and honored to be part of this advisory group to frame the effort. The Jewish Agency, which this year has its first non-Jewish senior emissary serving in DC this year, is also convening serious discussions about what it means to bring shared society realities to their work in the American Jewish context. And we're really proud to be a trusted resource for them on this, to be part of a broad advisory conversation. In a similar vein, this year we launched our first professional development course with the JCPA for JCRC professionals, and we're really grateful to JCPA for the opportunity to work together and partner at a time where these kind of needs were emerging. We also deepened our work with Israel educational organizations, Birthright and iCenter for the first time this year, as these organizations are on the front line of empowering educators to lead an important aspect of American Jewish discourse about Israel. Erica Schaps, our educational programs manager, led both the professional development and Israel educational aspects of our work, and I want to invite her to share some of her insights from this year. Erica.
Hi, it's great to be with all of you. It's particularly nice to look into the list of participants and see some of the people who participated in these professional development programs here with us today. I think over the course of this year, I had 3 key insights that are both relevant to showing where the field is at and also relevant to our thinking and shaping how we do these professional development programs and work to support our partners in deepening their capacity to do this work. The first is just how much of a hunger there is among Jewish professionals and Israel educators to deepen their own understanding regarding Arab citizens of Israel and Jewish-Arab relations. And this transcends knowledge levels, experience, time in Israel. People really want to learn more, particularly in light of the events this year, which caught people off guard or changed people's perceptions in a wide variety of ways. People have really taken advantage of these opportunities. But a second insight is literacy, is knowledge and familiarity with these issues is not enough for professionals to feel like they can then go forth and integrate it into the work they're doing on their own campuses or in their own communities or schools. That the knowledge is a key piece, but having a framework, having a toolkit, having strategies and approaches for making it relevant, accessible, meaningful, and constructive for their own constituents and stakeholders is really a key part of the story. So that's something we've been increasingly focusing on this year, is not just giving professionals information, but giving them a place to process and support and equipping them with knowledge to then go forth and do more of this work themselves with our support. And the final insight is just how important the lens and framework of citizenship continues to be in doing this work, and how powerful it is to focus on Arab citizens of Israel as citizens, as part of the state, to bring these issues forth in constructive and thoughtful and engaging ways in American Jewish contexts. And I'm looking forward to see, as we dive more into this work, how we bring those insights forward with a greater number of professionals in years to come.
Thank you. There's a lot more to say about all of these, but in the interest of time, I'm going to move on. Which is just to say that on top of this more in-depth work, we continued to work on awareness raising and public events with dozens and dozens of partners. We were delighted to bring, as always, diverse voices from the field. This is just a set. Some of these, this is just some examples, it's not everybody. We did this through national calls in partnership with large organizations. Again, the JCPA was a great partner on a series of calls to bring expert voices to current events, to current developments, and through which we reached thousands of people. And with local and regional partners, we were able to delve and engage in discussions with local constituents about a variety of issues, from current events in the headlines to issues like women's experience and leadership, and really give opportunities for first-person engagement with Arab citizens of Israel. And last but not least, the task force has long prided ourselves on the quality of our publications, and it's really, and I really do want to encourage everyone to look to our in-depth briefing papers, as we take great pains to make them readable, accurate, reliable, and synthesize numerous insights from the field. But if you really want to see us at our growing edge, I really want to promote and invite you to look at the new resources we created, the IATF Shorts. It's a new podcast from 9 to 24 minute segments thus far. It's really an effort to bring voices, diverse voices, into a very digestible format. We're building our capacities. This is really thanks to Elisa Kaff, who comes with a lot of communications capacities and made it possible for us to do this. We're hoping to do more of these throughout the year. Another new resource is the toolkit that you see at the bottom of the screen. As Erica was saying, when we go and we work with educators and professionals and start to look at building capacities, we realize we need to have a tool that gives them the tools and resources to do so. And I hope that we'll have a chance to share these with more people this year. Finally, I just want to thank our members, our partners, the executive committee, and of course our staff for making this shift with us this year, which really demanded many more professional capacities, demanded us to be able to engage many more partners on another level. And without the professionalism of the staff and the ability to bridge the issues and the content expertise on the ground with the adaptation needs to our constituents, it wouldn't have been possible. And I'm really excited for what this means for the year ahead. this concludes the formal part of the presentation, but we're happy to stick around and really respond to Q&A or chat, or have the whole staff respond to questions, whether it's about issues or about our work, as well as Erica's going to post another Jamboard, and we'll share that on the screen, so that for those who don't want to necessarily share your question with us to answer directly, but you want to just share your comments and reflections, we'd be really happy to hear those as well. Thank you for everyone's participation and sticking with us through the program today. We open it up for your chats and comments. Erica?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to share some of the insights that people have put up so far that we can all see. A lot of people really looking at the different identities that people are navigating and how that shapes the question of what shared life looks like, what integration looks like. And also a lot of people touched on the questions that our speakers raised about what the government wants for them, how are they perceived by the government and society, and how does that shape who they are and how they relate to the world around them. So we can all sort of look and reflect together at what we're seeing here. And as Liron said, any other questions or comments and engagement in the chat are really welcome.
So we have one question about how do we reconcile the concept of a Jewish-Arab shared society with the reality of a relatively small Jewish-Arab population ratio? How, and I think there's a question about the sense of personal security in Israel and how much people sometimes, despite living close together, still have trust and fear of each other. And how does that affect efforts of shared society? Ilan, do you wanna maybe take a stab at this one?
Yeah, I mean, for example, today I was in Ramle by chance, and the discussion, we were meeting with activists and social entrepreneurs working on shared society in Ramle and Lod, and the division and the gaps between the way shared society efforts take place in Lod and in Ramle. And one of the things that came out in regard of personal safety, security, aspects of shared society in public spaces in Ramle and Lod is that the leadership, top-down leadership, is very significant to the efforts of organizations and activists on the ground. And the way that a mayor phrases, the way that a mayor refers to efforts of shared society on the ground has very strong implications on the outcomes of those efforts. And I think we should keep in mind that we spend a lot of time meeting and discussing and consulting with civil society organizations, talking about the people doing these things, pushing those initiatives forward between Jews and Arabs in mixed cities or in mixed regions in Israel, in the educational system, in civil society. But I think we should also keep in mind that a lot of it is about leadership and about political stability that comes with leadership. And it's not just something that civil society can promote top down. It's a lot about our politicians, our public figures, leaders of the society, and the way we also use certain terminology in reference to certain groups in the population. Just as something to consider.
Thank you. Erica, maybe you can share the Jamboard, because I don't see that many questions necessarily coming in. I think maybe we can see if there's anything. So people spoke about insights about the need to develop strategic thinking, the confusion about what the Israeli government wants from us. And then maybe we can close on the question of, do Israeli police still see Arab citizens as enemies? I think a closing thought for today, because there's a lot to celebrate in the field. There's a lot to celebrate about more people wanting to be involved, and a lot to celebrate about the level of sophistication of the insights about how challenging this is, being really, really more shared widely. We didn't get a chance to speak about what's been happening just this week in Israel, which is that the issues of law enforcement, the issues of how to manage the crime epidemic in Arab society have raised exactly this tension that is one of the biggest challenges going forward, which is the tension of fear and mistrust, and the way that this complex identity of Arab citizens as being part of the larger conflict and at the same time citizens of the state often means that policy from the top comes in two different ways. One with a message of integration, another with a message of maintenance and enforcement, and treating the society once as equal citizens and another as part of on the other side of a conflict. And we see this with demonstrations today that took place in East Jerusalem, with how the government is looking at the violence plan, and the fact that as much as things are moving forward, there's always there may be signs of tensions brewing under the surface yet again. So I think that all the efforts, the speakers, the people who are working on the ground have their work cut out for them, and we really hope to be able to bring American Jewish organizations to be well-informed stakeholders on this journey. And with that, I want to thank everybody for sticking with us for the full hour and a half, and please join us for our events this coming year. Thank you to the staff, and thank you to our members. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Good night. Good afternoon.
Good night. Oh, yes, and Elisa put our annual report in the chat. Thank you, Elisa.